This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den.
And welcome into episode number 110 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. Myself, Noah Grant, joined by the illustrious, the illuminating Nicholas Maxon. Nick, what? Don't give me that look. Come on.
You're just practicing your creative writing skills. I get it. It has nothing to do with me.
You got light bulbs behind you. How can I not use the word illuminating? And let's be honest, Caleb Peabody has called you on it before. You have your lights on today, so...
I have a different camera on, which makes them seem brighter than what they usually are.
The question is Nick Maxon on and brighter than he usually is? We're going to find out here. We got a lot of topics
That's a great question.
to discuss here in the Huskies Warming House podcast. I almost said the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. That's the first thing that comes out in our show. We have a lot of transactional news related to both St. Cloud State and not St. Cloud State, so we'll definitely get into that. The main portion of the show, we did have a listener mailbag about all things pretty much NHL hockey, as well as the Minnesota Wild. They're deep into their series with the St. Louis Blues. Game 5 coming out on the day that this will come out tomorrow. We're recording tonight on Monday. It comes out tomorrow, Tuesday morning, before Game 5 at home at the Xcel Energy Center for the Minnesota Wild. And then our extra ice session, we're going to talk St. Cloud State coaching needs, both on the men's side, the women's side, as well as the goaltending position that was rounded out for men's hockey as well. So without further ado, Center Ice View News and Notes in the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup.
Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
As we get into our Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, again, as you mentioned before, NHL playoffs are well underway. Some teams are not in the playoffs. Some teams are on the golf links, and there are some off-season moves that are happening around the league. Let's first start actually not in the NHL, but let's start back with St. Cloud. So some big coaching news. St. Cloud State assistant Nick Oliver parting ways for the Huskies, actually heading back to his alma mater with the Fargo Force in the USHL. This time he'll be their new head coach. So Nick Oliver, bright young coach. So last 4 seasons as an assistant with Brett Larson behind the Huskies bench. Going back to his playing days, 2008 to 2011, was a standout with the Fargo Force. Actually then went on to play for the Huskies, was a pivotal player to help the St. Cloud to get to their first ever Frozen Four in 2013. It seems to be the city of Pittsburgh has magic for St. Cloud, because that was also in Pennsylvania, right? So, and then was an assistant for Sioux Falls in the USHL from 2015 to 2018 before joining St. Cloud behind the bench, again, as an assistant, as you mentioned before, to Brett Larson. This season for Fargo, a bit of a downswing, 28-6, fifth in the Western Conference this season. So about 500, but not enough for Fargo to keep their now former head coach. Nick Oliver comes in as fresh blood. I think he will do some good things there up in the USHL. We obviously wish him all the best of luck. So I think he's going to do some good things up there in Fargo.
Yeah, I'm curious to see. Speaking of Fargo, by the way, so they had, I forget who their longtime head coach was, but he left, and then their new coach was only there for a single year, and it just didn't pan out, I think, for a variety of reasons. But I'm curious to see, and this is not a knock on Nick by any means. Nick Oliver, I think, does a really good job of kind of being a player's coach and bridging that gap. But I know that when we talk to him, he's a very dialed in man. He's very serious. And I'm curious to see if his head coaching soiree, this is his first kick at the can at being, at the head of a hockey team, to see if he can take that, intellectual prowess that he has and turn it into getting a group of 20, 25, 30 players to buy into that system. I'm curious to see how he bridges that gap, how he utilizes his assistant coaches, and kind of brings that, because like you mentioned, his wealth of hockey knowledge is extensive.
Yes.
The dedication and time that he puts in, his ability, in scouting at that level and knowing what he's looking for to help guys transition to the next level, and guys coming into that USHL level now. Of course, prior experience in Sioux Falls. He was actually the director of scouting too, as well in that role, in addition to being an assistant coach. So he brings a lot of skills and tool sets in that toolbox. I'm curious to see if now he can articulate that as a head coach, because as we've seen with another person who's going to be in this group, Mike Yeo and the Flyers, sometimes people can't bridge that gap. I'm not saying Nick Oliver can or can't. I don't know either way.
We don't know yet, right?
We're going to find out, and I'm really excited for him.
Me too. Did a couple, hockey and chill sessions, for my time in St. Cloud, and breaking down film with him. You can tell he's a very attentive to detail kind of coach. Definitely knows the game in and out, both offensively and defensively. And as you mentioned, though, the role of the head coach is, how can you get your group of players to play the way that you want to play, to be able to connect with them not only as athletes but as people. To be able to be approachable, yet also be able to put the foot down and hold people accountable. It's a very fine line to walk. And, I think from some advice I've had from other head coaches, sometimes it's not a linear path. Sometimes you have to kind of go up and down on the line depending on the day. I think he can do it. And obviously this will be his first big test of that. So again, we'll have to see how he does. I do think he's got a great future ahead of us, and we do wish him, as you mentioned, the best of luck.
I just wanted to add one more quick thing too. What a guy to learn from, in Brett Larson, by the way, too.
Yes.
A great articulator, someone who learned from Scott Sandlin. I mean, the hockey world keeps on giving if you're willing to sit there and listen. So, a lot of bright minds here, and excited for Nick. Unfortunately, the worst part of this whole story is the St. Cloud Huskies lose a very prominent and very effective assistant coach.
Yes. Although knowing St. Cloud and their ties to Fargo, maybe that strengthens that up a little bit, because a lot of their recruits,
seriously,
Evan Bushy too, slated to come in sometime either this year or next year. I don't know for sure, but another Fargo Force, product. Most recently, Jack Peart was there for a stint.
A lot of the new guys too that it just came in through the USHL draft moments ago, actually, are coming in under Nick Oliver too. So, like you mentioned, that pipeline might be strengthened, and it's about the only good thing for St. Cloud to come out of North Dakota, let's be honest, besides myself, of course, right? Like,
we'll go with that. Sure. Okay. Debatable. What is kind of debatable though, Noah, is maybe some decisions happening out east. The New York Islanders parted ways with head coach Barry Trotz after 4 seasons. He won a Jack Adams Award as their head coach, 2 conference final losses to the eventual Stanley Cup winning Tampa Bay Lightning. 13-game road swing to start the season because, again, UBS Arena, their new barn out there, very close to LaGuardia Airport and right next to the tennis courts out there for the U.S. Open. That was a tough stretch. And then when they did get back home, never really found their footing. It was just not a great start to the season. 50 games in 99 days. So, I mean, that's a lot of hockey. Just not a great way, but at the end of the day, no, you don't control the scheduling, but you can control how you respond to that, right? Yeah. So also won a cup in Washington before he took that job in 2018, where I think a couple surprising moves. I think a lot of folks were surprised that Washington didn't re-up him for at least another year. Yeah. New York was happy to swing in and get him. Again, had some success this year, just didn't pan out. And Lou Lamoriello, 1 more year left on his deal as GM, probably looking to make sure that maybe his job is safe as they move forward. In total, Barry Trotz goes 152, 102, and 34, which is a .587 winning percentage in his time in the behind the Islanders bench. First season that he missed the playoffs with him behind the bench. So that, unfortunately, and we're seeing that with other teams, that unfortunately success sometimes breeds whether you have a job or not. And the NHL is very cutthroat, and it's unfortunate for Trotz, but there will be some other teams lined up for his services. He will not be employed for long.
Yeah, it's
unemployed for long. I definitely screwed that up.
Yeah, well, it's a curious. Well, the Islanders screwed this one up too. This is a very curious thing to me, and I know that if you read Lou Lamoriello's kind of things and his quotes, they were kind of odd about it. They were kind of keeping things close to the vest. I don't take a whole lot of stock into some of them where he talked about how he hadn't consulted the players, which they just had their player meetings last week. So I'm going to assume that had some piece. He was very adamant in talking about how this season's performance in and of itself was not the sole reason that Trotz was given away, essentially. but his pedigree and even his time with the Islanders still kind of speaks to success. I mean, it was a resounding success in the way that he played. One of the things that, and this comes from an article in The Athletic that they had talked about, is that they maybe believe that his style of play is a difficult thing to uphold through an 82-game season. It looks better in the shorter spans. You have a COVID year, you have a playoff bubble, you have these stints where that defensive shutdown game, playing these 2-1 contests, it looks good, but that attention to detail, that defensive juggernaut, Minnesota Wild fans know it all too well. It's a difficult way to play year in and year out and try to find long-term success. So I don't know that there's a ton of bearing on that being the other sole reason that you would let a coach like this go. Could you say the locker room needed a new voice? Maybe, maybe not. But Barry Trotz and his resounding success as a head coach is, I think, laid out right in front of you. I mean, it's not like Mike Yeo, who has had a track history of not being successful in previous tenures in the National Hockey League, right?
And to your point about playing style too, it could be where, the league is transitioning to more offense, right? And, with, maybe a defensive first style. I mean, the Minnesota Wild have been, well, for lack thereof, almost a decade plus, have been trying to find a way to get out of that style, right? Because they understood that this was not something that the way the league was trending was going to get them to a successful regular season, but also maybe be competitive in not only just the first round, but multiple rounds in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And so, is it maybe a knee-jerk moment maybe for the Islanders? Maybe. Obviously every coach has their style and the way they want to play. And, to me, I look at it as, I think Lou Lamoriello is trying to secure his retirement more than anything. Just because, again, he's got 1 year left on his deal. Say what you want about Barry Trotz. He, like you said, he has a track record of success. He's a Stanley Cup winner very recently with Washington. So obviously there's probably more behind the scenes that we don't know. And as you talk about a quote in The Athletic, it was Rangers head coach Gerard Gallant that said, I've been there recently, and knowing him and knowing how his pedigree is, there'll be plenty of people lining up for his services. And one of them could be Detroit. Just throwing one out there. I'm not sure.
This was actually a listener question, kind of a 3-parter. The other thing I wanted to throw out too is they did say his leash with veterans like Zdeno Chara, Zach Parise, those guys was a little bit too long sometimes in terms of giving them a little bit more runway than maybe they should have had in certain situations. I don't know. But the 3-part question, essentially, we kind of just answered this. Why did they give Barry Trotz the axe? But the second question that you kind of alluded to, which team do you think, could use Barry Trotz next? And how long do you think he'll stay without a job? I don't think he makes it through halfway through the summer without being unemployed. I mean, I think he gets scooped up pretty quickly. I like the Detroit route. Is there another fit for a team that feels that they maybe want to kind of get rid of a body? Is the Philadelphia Flyers another really good fit? They're without Mike Yeo now, which we'll touch on in a moment. Is there any other team that you think maybe kind of stands out to you?
It's hard to say because, again, there is a little bit of something with the style that he wants to play. I think there is a little bit of that too now. I don't think it's, I would say like the majority of the reason why. But I guess we'll see, right? Because, do you have, for example, in Philadelphia, what you had, Alain Vigneault, who was a very experienced coach himself, and then Mike Yeo, who we'll touch on in a little bit, right?
Not good.
Not great. But at the end of it too, do you want that veteran? Do you want a veteran coach, or do you want someone that's new and maybe has a little bit younger blood that maybe can connect? Because I know Philadelphia is going through quite a transition themselves, right? Detroit, I think, is probably a better landing spot because you got a mix of veterans and you got some younger guys coming up. And one of the biggest reasons Detroit, I think, maybe held themselves back was maybe defensive structure, honestly.
Yeah, seriously.
They've got some good offense. I mean, holy cow, speaking of back end, how about Maurice Sider? Holy cow, is he really, really good. Lucas Raymond, also a good young star for Detroit. So maybe you put some veteran coaching there. I think there could be a good fit there. We'll have to see how Detroit's management approaches that. But feel free to jump. I know we have Otto in here. Feel free to jump to Mike Yeo. We've been alluding to him, so you might as well jump to that one first. We'll just jump to him right now because surprisingly, Chuck Fletcher parts with a core piece. Yes, I know. And this and I laugh at that because seriously, he never did that in Minnesota. It was just something he never did. I'm actually still surprised that Chuck Fletcher's still behind as a GM too, honestly. So some surprise, so not so much surprising. So Mike Yeo was, again, the interim head coach right after he came in relief of Alain Vigneault, 17-36-7 in his interim stint. I'm not a math guy, but that's not great. Sixth head coach in team history since 2010. If that doesn't give you an idea of some of the struggles the Flyers have had in recent times, and mind you, 2010 was probably the pinnacle of their success when they were in the Stanley Cup final against Chicago, right? That was a heck of a hockey team. Flyers are now the number 4 team in Philadelphia. Do you want to count for all Philly fans? Average attendance barely eclipsing 10,000 a game. And for those who know Philadelphia, and yeah, they're crazy events, but that's a sports thirsty market. This move, unfortunately, makes total sense. And I would imagine, too, if I'm ownership, if it's Fletcher, that's probably having that conversation. He goes, either you get rid of Yo or you're going with them. That kind of thing, right? So there's a very big decision because I don't think Chuck Fletcher's job is as nearly as safe either. I think he's on a short leash as well. And if this next season doesn't show any sort of improvement, I think he's out even before the end of next season, depending on what happens. So let's go back a little bit because another personality that we all were shocked when he originally got the job is not surprisingly out of a job, Pierre Mcguire. Ottawa Senators firing him after only 10 months on the job as vice president of hockey development. Let me say this. I have nothing against Pierre Mcguire. I actually think he articulates some stuff pretty well. He's got an energy to a lot of sportscasters don't bring. However, there was always, at least in my mind, what do you call it? Sort of the excitement sometimes and then clouded the judgment. And I'm not sure if that's accurate. Ottawa obviously felt that they needed a new voice in that role. So Pierre no longer with the Ottawa Senators organization. This was shortly after. I mean, it was a 3-year contract that he signed. Was an assistant coach with Pittsburgh in '92 when they won their Stanley Cup. I think, wasn't he a GM at one point with Hartford? Yes.
He's been in some weird spots. You know, let's just say it. He's a weird guy, and he's been in a couple weird spots. And I think that his broadcasting role soured as I think time went on with him with some of the things.
He disconnected from the game, right? There's one thing where when you're out of the role that close to hockey, right? Especially when you're in an analyst role, a meaningful development role, right? The game changes, right? And if you're not connected to the game very closely, you do get disconnected. That's the unfortunate nature of the beast that is professional sports. That's not just hockey.
So this was actually another one of our listener questions. You know, is 10 months enough? So let's go back to Pierre Mcguire because I think the signing surprised people a little bit too. And I think I want to go back to you want to talk about Pierre Mcguire and his broadcast. He did know the book on almost every junior player that was coming up. So I think that there was a real big piece to seeing, you know, who are guys, you know, he wasn't really a scout, but player development, seeing guys and how they might be in that spot. Maybe scouting was maybe more something that might have been a better fit for him too. But I
disagree. And here's why I say that, because you have and are an analyst, and some of the stuff that he went out, right? And he did his research, right? Yeah. Now, it's one thing to do research and to convey that on air. It's another thing to take that information and to make sound judgments onto what's best for a player's continued development to get to the next level, whether it's juniors to minors or minors to pro. Those decisions that he has affects a young player's career from a very young age. And it could be where you make the wrong move and a player's career is very much altered, right? So whatever he was doing obviously drew the attention of upper management that said, I'm not sure this person, whether it's decision-making or whether it's, whether it is the scouting reports or, whatever the case may be, whatever he was in charge of with that information wasn't conveying the results they were liking.
Yeah. So let's talk about a good comparison here. Paul Fenton, 1 year for the Minnesota Wild. It's 10 months enough to evaluate something like this?
It can be, because for Paul Fenton, it was never about the direction, because I was at the press conference when I was an intern at Fox 9, and we asked owner Craig Leopold this question: was it the direction or the draft or anything to do with the direction of the organization led to this? And the answer was a flat no. It was his communication style. It was his management style. Yes, he was kind of known to be just my way or the highway kind of guy. And that just doesn't work in pro sports. It just doesn't at that level. So I don't know if it's a fair comparison, Noah, for that, Men's, just because you're comparing apples and oranges. But to the point of the question, is it enough time? Depending on what's happening, it can be. Yeah. And you almost have to credit an owner like Craig Leopold that if you have enough information and it's only been 10 months to sort of pseudo admit you made a mistake. And he admitted that also in that press conference. It's a tough pill to swallow, but he also did mention I'd rather admit it, own up to it, and make a correct change. And because he did that, he landed Bill Guerin, and look what's happened since then. So sometimes owning up to it and at least getting rid of what's maybe holding you back is the best thing. And for the Minnesota Wild's prospects, I think they're sitting okay with that decision.
Yeah, definitely getting rid of things that holding you back. So that will be the last time we will hear from Nick Maxon here on the Huskies Warming House podcast.
Yes.
No,
yes.
Just kidding, Nick. I'm gonna take your last point here because we are gonna roll through here very quickly and get onto the main portion of the show. But yes, great discussions. We are cruising here so far on the Huskies Warming House podcast. So I can't wait to see where we fall off a cliff and crash and burn. But things that
pretty close
didn't crash and burn for this man. I thought that they might, considering that he was involved in the Kyle Beach scandal back in 2010 as part of that front management office here. But Winnipeg Jets general manager Kevin Cheveldayoff, 3-year pact through 2025, taking over back in 2011, 4 Stanley Cup final or playoff appearances, and 1 conference final location spot to boot since that relocation from Atlanta. He was kind of a guy that I thought maybe was on his way out. I feel like he's kind of been up and down in his decision-making as of lately. Quickly, your thoughts? Do you think that this is the right move for the Peg?
I think it's a show-me contract, honestly, for 3 years. Cheveldayoff, as you mentioned, been there now for 11 years since they moved from Atlanta. You kind of wonder what Paul Maurice's influence was with Cheveldayoff. It does speak wonders to Paul Maurice and his decision to just up in the middle of the season to drop what he's doing. So does that maybe signal us more behind the scenes than we're aware of? It might. We don't know that for sure. But anytime you extend a GM, especially after a couple of missed playoff opportunities, a lot of the core hasn't really changed. I do get the sense that there's going to have to be some significant changes to this roster to get them over the hump. Now, could you say that they've had some injury problems? Obviously, the Dustin Byfuglien situation was unforeseen and really not much you can do about that. So they've had some tough things to deal with. But nonetheless, they're going to have to start showing some improvement. And I mean, geez, Winnipeg earlier this season, I thought was looking pretty good, and injuries killed them. So we'll see. More needs to happen, but I think he's in the right spot, but improvements have to be made or else he might be out.
Also, maybe a potential landing spot for a guy like maybe Barry Trotz. Who knows? The thing that's interesting with Winnipeg, their press conference at the end was kind of weird. Paul Stastny obviously is potentially on his way out as a free agent, but comments from Captain Mark Scheifele talking, like he made a comment something along the lines of, I don't know if I'm going to be here next year, that sort of thing. He's got 2 years left on his contract. So you kind of wonder what's going on in that locker room, if there are things behind closed doors that maybe kind of need some tweaking. And it kind of comes to the point, right? I think, when you extend Cheveldayoff and a GM and there's pressure from not only obviously as competitors, whether you're on the ice or off, right? Everybody wants to win. I think there's some ownership pressure now too, that, hey, guys, and I think there was maybe a warning, in those postseason, maybe those interviews, exit interviews as they call them, right? Whereas you're taking the temperature of the room, but then you're also probably saying, hey guys, if I'm going to keep you around, we need to start showing success, or guess what? I might be forced to move everybody. So maybe it's a signal of that, where that was part of the conversation in the exit interviews. I think that's possible. Do we know for sure? No. But again, I think, as I alluded to, there's going to have to be some improvements for Winnipeg, or else you might see some core changes and maybe a possible rebuild. Who knows? Yeah, Mark Scheifele, curious case, great offensive player, kind of a defensive liability for a guy who's a top 6 centerman in the National Hockey League, but could be worse, Nick. Could be Rocky Wirtz. Anyway, moving on. More St. Cloud State hockey news. This one a little bit sadder here. Former St. Cloud State hockey coach Charlie Bash, winning 181 games with the St. Cloud State Huskies, passed away on May 4th at the age of 96. So curious story for him. And I'd love to get Bill Prout's thoughts from Center Ice View at some of these things too. I know that he's met with some people that probably knew him a little bit better than we did. Obviously, initially hired actually as the football coach in St. Cloud back in 1968, added responsibilities of hockey head coach and actually taught classes with his biology degree. So kind of a jack of all trades kind of guy. Head coach for 16 seasons from 1968 until 1984, ranking 3rd all time among St. Cloud State Husky head coaches with those 181 victories. So our condolences to the Bash family, and you will definitely be remembered as one of the iconic guys that essentially turned St. Cloud State hockey into what it is today. He was at the forefront of that transition back, in the 70s and 80s and preparing them for that Division I level. I think that success at the D2 and D3 level doesn't come without a guy like him. And real quick comments,
kind of an interesting, almost mirrored story. How about John Gagliardi at St. John's was actually a hockey coach first before taking over the football program, and I think history kind of wrote itself from that. So it's interesting when the coaching is a translatable skill, right? Doesn't matter which sport you're teaching. If you can coach, and as we talked about earlier, you can get players to do what you want and be respectable, you can be successful anywhere. So another still comparison again, John Gagliardi, who had a hell of a career at St. John's as well.
Take notes, Nick Oliver. Take notes. Just kidding. Another comment here before we get to the injury news around the playoff series is in the National Hockey League. Another injury, Joe Foley, the off-ice official, hit by a pane of glass in Boston on Friday night during Game 3. Essentially, kind of got rocked free after the Bruins went up 3-1 in that game against Carolina. It fell on top of him. He ended up being stretchered off and heading to the hospital. He was released from the hospital that same night on Friday. They do expect him to hopefully return in the final 2 to 3 games in that series. That series is knotted up at 2 games apiece at the time of recording between the Bruins and Carolina. So wishing Joe Foley the best. Hopefully we see him back in the penalty box without panes of glass coming down on top of him. Obviously those are people that go very unheralded and unsung sometimes for their roles to make hockey games what we know them on TV around the National Hockey League. Injury news, wrapping up the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Let's go kind of series by series, so to speak. Let's start Pittsburgh, New York Rangers. Netminder Casey DeSmith for the Pens, of course, out for the year with core muscle surgery.
Second time in 2 years for core muscle surgery, too.
Yeah, leaving in the second overtime in Game 1, and it's been Louis Domingue, the third-string journeyman, who essentially has taken over the mantle and has looked pretty good so far in this series against the Rangers. Ricard Raquel did practice with the team today on Monday. He will be out for game number 4 as far as we know for the Penguins, but he is on the ice, so that's good after he went down in Game 1, as well as Brian Dumoulin, who is out for the Penguins as well. The Rangers missing for Barclay Goodrow, who is on a week-to-week basis right now, and then Tyler Mott was also hurt early on in this series as well. Colorado, the Avalanche without netminder Darcy Kemper for Game 4 after that freak eye injury.
That was nuts.
And I wonder this, if you're Colorado, you know that you probably have this series in the bag unless something insane happens for Nashville. Maybe it's just he's got swelling around that eye from a stick going through the cat eyes of the goalie mask. Maybe you rest him, see if you can snap Game 4, and then just see if you can just kind of rest the boys and get him back up to speed and up to health here. Because I think the Avs with or without Darcy Kemper are in a very good spot in this Nashville series, especially Nashville missing Andrew Cogliano and Ryan Murray, and then Mark Borowiecki. Colorado was missing Andrew Cogliano and Ryan Murray, but Mark Borowiecki of the Predators has missed some time, as well as UC Saros.
A shot block, I think, right, from Borowiecki. Yeah, I remember seeing that.
And Connor Ingram has kind of carried the mantle in lieu of UC Saros, and he's looked all right, actually.
He's looked good. He's looked good. And game was a Game 2, I think. If it wasn't for Connor Ingram, that could have been an 8-0 game easily.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's been the only game that has been tight for the Preds. We'll have to see how they can respond here soon. St. Louis, Minnesota Wild. St. Louis decimated with injuries on the back end. Let's put it that way. Torrey Krug, Nick Leddy. I think Nick Leddy got hurt from that hit from Matt Boldy, where he went
easily
to the boards awkwardly.
100%.
Yeah. So Marco Scandella out again after returning in Game 3, and then Robert Bertuzzo, who I don't mind seeing out of the lineup at all. I think he's kind of a plug. I'm going to say that on this podcast right now. I've never been a fan of Robert Bertuzzo's game. That's my personal opinion. But anyway, that's all I got on that one. I really hate Robert Bertuzzo. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but just
he's a hit first guy. He definitely
just
is
like Matt Dumba, except Bertuzzo actually makes contact.
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
Yikes. Speaking of a guy that makes contact legally or illegally, Washington Capitals without Tom Wilson for at least a little bit here. And Carl Hagelin sustaining an eye injury about a week and a half ago. Florida in that matchup missing defenseman Marcus Nudavara. In Boston, Carolina, Boston missing both Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy as of right now. So missing that first pairing. Plus Jesper Froden in their series against the Canes, who are still without key netminders, obviously, as well as forward Jordan Martinook and defenseman Jake Gardner.
You need to call up David Ayers.
Seriously. Yeah. And Jake Gardner, we'll have to see if he stops throwing up pizzas in his return to form here for Carolina. He's never going to live that down in Toronto. It's just tough. Won't. So final couple of series here. Dallas and Calgary haven't seen anything crazy in terms of the injury bug as of yet. And Los Angeles and Edmonton, one each side. Victor Arvidsson for the Kings, and Edmonton right now without Derek Ryan. Welcome into episode number 110 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. Nick Maxon joining myself, Noah Grant. Nick, we got a lot to pack into this show. I think I'm just going to start the show. Normally I ask you how you're doing, but I'm going to start with my own story, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Hockey is a fun game until most of the time, until you get like us, where you start getting older and out of shape by the second. But beyond that, when equipment malfunctions, sometimes it can be hilarious and sometimes it can be really freaky. I had to get a new pair of skates the other night. Kind of interesting. So for those who don't know, if you ever take a look at the bottom of a hockey skate, they are actually what's called the toque. That's the white part that essentially is clamped onto the.
For those playing the home game, it holds the blade. Let's keep it simple.
Yeah, but on the other side, it is actually riveted into the bottom of the skate, and there is a footbed in between there, kind of a plate that is in between, sandwiched in between, and those pieces essentially keep the skate together. Well, I was transitioning backwards, and the entire side of my toque and all the rivets ripped out, and the toque actually ripped out, and the bottom of the skate ripped out. And I fell backwards so hard that I actually bruised and strained both of the front muscles in my neck. So I had to get a new pair of wheels, and that was a very interesting soiree. I have never had that happen before, and I obviously wasn't expecting it. But I mean, have you ever had any sort of equipment malfunction like that, Nick, where you had a literal piece of equipment shed on you? I mean, I've seen guys block shots and have seen like a knee pad like crack open or something crazy like that. But I mean, it was like I fell.
That happened, but you could call it a case of self-terrorism.
Because I mean, like I fell, and part of my French, but I was like, holy shit, like I haven't caught an edge like that in a long time. Like that was weird. And then I stood up, and the entire thing went sideways, and I'm like, oh, well, that would be why. I don't totally suck, just mostly.
Yeah, not so much as far as like equipment failing, like in that regard, but couple of things of note that I would remember. I was playing in a game, and you're wearing your elbow guards, right?
Yeah.
And I was taking a shot, and I released the one timer, and I got hit just after I took the shot. And I don't know how it happened, but I think maybe my arm got kind of nestled into my torso, and it kind of shifted the elbow pad up.
Oh.
So my elbow hit first. Now it felt like I just bruised it kind of thing. Excuse me. But then I got back to the locker room. Excuse me. Post game. No, I can tell. It was a very detrimental story, as you can tell.
Yeah, it actually damages his lungs so severely.
I know. Crazy. But I get back, I'm taking off my gear, and I take off the elbow pad, and it looks like there's just a bunch of skin hanging out. I blew up my bursa sac.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was ugly. So, and then the other one
you were the elbow.
I'm not sure. So the other one was definitely my fault. It was supposed to be covering the defenseman. They go D to D. I was late to get up to him and stuck out the stick for a block and put it right to my face. So yeah.
Oh,
I still blame the equipment, but I should have had a different. Should have had the Sackett curve instead of the Crosby curve. We'll put it that way.
Speaking of Sack X, I definitely got hit in the nads the other day too. I deflected a puck into myself the other day too. Not good. Not a good weekend for the kid for sure. Kind of interesting the way that those work. I do remember my senior year at West Region. I did, which is tournament time. It's essentially the whatever you would call the qualifier for the state tournament in North Dakota hockey. And I blocked
in Minnesota. They call that sections.
Yeah. So, well, speaking of sections of my leg were not doing so hot. So I blocked a shot with my ankle, first one right in front of the D-man, and didn't feel that great. So I blocked it. Puck actually ended up going right back to the D-man. And I'm kind of down and out at this point wearing the first one. Well, he gets the bright idea. I'm just going to tee it up again. Boom. Same shot, same location in the leg. I'm like, you got to be joking me. And luckily it was one of those where I was about probably 7 or 8 feet from the bench. So I'm just crawling into the bench. Well, turned out from pretty much right below my knee all the way down to my toes was just purple because of all the swelling that was going on in there. And I had to ice my foot for about an hour and a half before the next game just to get my skate back in, my foot back into the skate. So, hockey injuries are kind of a wild one. Both my teeth are fake, just like my personality. Got those knocked out playing hockey, obviously. Broke my nose once getting hit by my own teammate. So, hockey is a dangerous game, I think, to say the least, Nick.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, speaking of things that we did that are dangerous, we did do a fan mailbag, Nick.
That is dangerous. Yes.
That is very dangerous. And even more scary, we had some people actually respond to us. Nick, I'll give you one hint and one hint only. We're going to skate to one song and one song only to figure out who might have had this particular tweet. Number one, why has the puck scribe been avoiding me? When will Alex Micheletti admit that starting Fleury was the right call for the Minnesota Wild? We'll touch on that.
I don't have a buzzer, but can I buzz?
You can. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it Caleb?
No way. How did you get that? No. Incredible.
Because apparently he needs attention from me.
I mean, so do I. He does think that I'm very lovely, though. Someone has to tell him that he's probably off base on that one. When will Go Huskies Woo and I be considered for St. Cloud State coaching operations? Caleb behind the bench, I think, would be a good motivator for the boys. Definitely upbeat and positive. I don't know how much.
Could you imagine him trying to reprimand some players on the bench? I'm not sure. I don't know.
If you don't chip this puck out the way you're supposed to, Nick and I will not take you to Val's after the game. That's, just saying.
No, he'll just show him a picture of getting dunked on with a Fisher Price and say, this is what's happening with you on the ice. Stop it.
One thing's for sure. The lighting in the locker room will be primo grade A. I know that much.
Would be, yes.
And everyone's glasses would be on. And what time is WX_Dave's bedtime? I hear it's pretty early from what he goes. I think it's about 9:30 from what I've been told. So I think that's my guess. Nick's been avoiding you because Nick's been doing his thing. The Fleury situation we're definitely going to discuss in just a few moments. Let me see if there's anything that's pretty much everything else is Minnesota Wild related. So let's talk about the questions related to the Wild, and we'll jump into the series against the St. Louis Blues, which is 2-2 at the time of recording on the eve of game number 5. So Marc-Andre Fleury, from my personal opinion, I don't know that he was the choice to start game 1, to be honest. I don't think he looked that great in game 1, but I think since then, he has done his job. He makes me a little nervous because he is an all or nothing, a little bit old school goalie. He is swimming sometimes in the crease. I wouldn't mind seeing Cam Talbot if Minnesota happens to drop game number 5. I think Cam Talbot has earned a start just by the way he's played. He hasn't played in a week and a half too, which kind of makes me a little bit
also
worried.
Nervous, right?
Yeah, seriously. I thought he was going to get a shot in game 2. Marc-Andre Fleury, to his credit, played lights out in that contest. I'd like to see a little bit more of Cam Talbot, but I think if you're Dean Evison, you've made the choice and you've stuck with it. You got to commend him for that, in my opinion.
I think we mentioned this before the start of the playoffs. I was curious because I think Michael Russo was on it too, that it had already been kind of settled that Marc-Andre Fleury would be the playoff starter. And with Marc-Andre Fleury, any successful goaltender, you want reps, you want consistency, right? And with the Wild going back and forth between Fleury and Talbot through the end of the season, and was it maybe an injury prevention thing or whatnot? I don't know, but I was a little bit put off by the fact that if you were going to start Fleury, why didn't you get him some more reps, in a row to get him up to that? Game 1, you could see there was some rust there, maybe some nerves attended to, but I think as far as what you traded for, you're getting exactly what you were hoping for, right? A guy that, is energetic, a guy that's great in the locker room. He's provided some really big saves in times of need. And I do think sometimes the Minnesota Wild defense have been bailed out by him, a couple of times. Now, he can't obviously do everything. Yes, when you can't lay a hit, Matt Dumba, come on. Anyway, seriously. So, but
for young players, play the puck with your stick first, please.
Or, as you mentioned, if you're going to play the body,
got to make it happen.
You got to get it. As you mentioned, you got to get one or the other. You can't leave with nothing. If you leave with nothing, you have not done your job.
Just ask the Mavericks a couple weeks ago.
Right. And we talk about, let's build on that a little bit. You at the very least disrupt the play, even for a half second, right? Even if he's got to go back and regain the puck, that half second could be enough time for your partner, your Brodeen or another forward to come back and maybe tie the puck a little bit more. That puck never ends up in the net. So either way, I think you've gotten what you've wanted out of Fleury. I think that Minnesota Wild, again, we talked about at times, have been a bit porous defensively, and I don't think it would have mattered whether it's Fleury or Talbot that was in the net. That I don't know if you really could have swayed the pendulum any differently. So I'm happy with it. Big pivotal game 5 coming up at home. But the good news is the Wild are virtually unbeatable at home, even though they lost game 1. I think they'll be all right. So I'm confident.
It's been a weird, been a weird series. The goal margin, the smallest goal margin was last game, 3 goals. All the other ones have been 4, so it's kind of been odd.
And a couple of those empty netters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But speaking of disruptors, as you kind of mentioned, kind of a two-parter here before we get to the big guns here. So I'm going to combine 2 questions. One of them was, should the Minnesota Wild be using their 4th line more? And number 2, how do they involve Tyson Jost in the game plan a little bit more? Dean Everson seems very hesitant to try different things in game. He's been playing very well in a limited role. I understand there's been a number of penalties, but it'd be nice to get some more 5-on-5 looks. So
this is if you're taking penalties,
right? Kind of a difficult set of questions here. I think number 1. I'm in the regard that I think that I would like to see the 4th line a little bit more, just in general, in the sense that I know the game flow has kind of been disrupted. And the one thing that really affects this, and it actually kind of goes back to my dad and I were talking about this for the Golden Gophers back in the NCAAs, how their depth really hadn't been a factor for them because you have 3 TV timeouts in a period. Anytime it seems like the 4th line could capitalize with their depth, you get a TV timeout in there where they don't get to exercise that. I think that happens at the NHL level. Penalties disrupt that. I think the 4th line, what did they play? They played for 5.5, maybe 6 minutes in the last game.
Correct.
They didn't play a whole lot. So I think a little bit more is slightly warranted, but I also understand you go with the big guns and know what you trust. As far as Tyson Jost, I think he's played well. I mean, he definitely hasn't produced by any means, just in that role. But I don't know that Tyson Jost is a guy that you look at him and you say, there's a guy that we need to seriously be giving him more minutes, because the question is, at the expense of what? At the expense of who?
Correct. I'll start with the point 1, right? And that is, so in general, right, you need more from your 4th line, I think, is how I would phrase it, right?
Yes.
Your 4th line has not really been playing like a 4th line. In fact, I would argue the Grief line has been more of a 4th line that can score, because they can forecheck, they can hold possession, they can really grind and tear down the opposing D and the opposing forwards and tire them out, right? That's what your 4th line is supposed to be. Tyson Jost isn't the biggest kid. Neither is Brandon Duhaime, even though he's got wheels, and I love that about him. I wouldn't be shocked if we see Nick Bukestad come in for Game 5, just to try to get a little bit more size and maybe a little bit more puck control into that 4th line, because when I've watched the 4th line last couple of games, they have not held any sort of possession in the offensive zone. That's what your job is.
You know what the problem is, too, and I understand why he's in the lineup. He's pretty much a protective servicer of sorts. Nick Delorier's got to come out of the lineup, man. He does. I'm sorry, because he does not drive possession. He's not. I think of guys that have kind of filled that role. Your Curtis Gabriels, your Chris Stewarts of years past. Those guys both could really add an offensive push. And Nick Delorier, when he came to the Minnesota Wild, was providing that. Granted, that's regular season, but he was adding that. But I think you combine that with, it's his first playoff series. He's supposed to be that agitator. And any hockey player knows this. When you only play 5, 6, 6.5 minutes a night and you're sitting there cold, and then you're asked to go hard in the best league in the world for hockey in a playoff contest and asked to give a hard 45-minute shift, everyone sits on their couch as an armchair GM and says, oh, I could do this. No, it's hard to get your body back into that motion for 45 seconds and go hard.
I would almost argue you take out Jost, you keep Delorier, but you get Bukestad in, because I think you're right about Delorier. He was supposed to be sort of that physical presence too. When St. Louis, we saw them start to run around a little bit in Game 3, even though speaking of not being able to hit, I mean, they were worse than Mike Dumbo was last night. So, like you said, what's the contribution there, right? So with Jost, nothing against him personally, right? He's a great hockey player. He's in the show for a reason, but he's not providing you anything to me that would say get him in the lineup.
I've actually liked the way he's played. He had a couple shots last game. I think he's been the only guy in that line that I think has had possession through the neutral zone, though. That's the one thing, is he's had a couple of zone entries that have been all right to me. But like you said, I don't think the 4th line has had enough of a sample size, unfortunately, to kind of really determine one way or the other. And
the other part of that, though, is that what would you, like, as you mentioned, what would you take away? Because the Grief line's been so good. I would even argue Kevin Fiala has been not great this series.
So he's actually our next question, and I'm excited for this one. I know I kind of got into people in Twitter about this, so why don't we open this up? Because I've been waiting.
Let's open up the door.
So question is, why do you think Kevin Fiala has reverted back to a melancholy version of himself? And then someone else had commented, one thing for sure is Matt Boldy is making rookie errors and losing puck battles, something we alluded to going into this
you
series.
don't say. He is a rookie.
Yeah, and playing giveaways sure does not help Kevin Fiala either. So the other point that was brought up by Michael Russo and others, and I love Michael Russo, but I kind of didn't understand the tweet of 14 PIMs now for Kevin Fiala. I want to throw this out there, and I said this on Twitter the other day. 8 of those over half of them have come from the 2 double minor high sticks that he's had. Say what you want about them, they were what they were.
Right.
Shit luck, right? Okay. Next penalty they took was at the tail end of the Blues game, that cross check in the corner, which I thought was a pretty weak call, in my opinion, essentially pushing in. I mean, no reason for it, but whatever. Okay, the other one, game number 1, coincidental minor at the end of a period, 4-on-4. It's a nothing penalty. Nothing comes out of it. Game number 2's penalty was a hooking minor with 3.5 minutes left in a 62 hockey game. Kevin Fiala was -2 in game number 1. Doesn't have a point since, but he's been even since game 2 and beyond. He's had a multitude of shots in his last, whatever it's been, since game 2, game 3, 4, 2, 3, and 4, excuse me. He's still driving possession to me. He's still getting opportunities. He's definitely snake bit. He's definitely frustrated. He's definitely taken a couple penalties that unfortunately have not gone his way. I'm not panicked yet, Nick. I'm really not. What I'm panicked about is that Freddie Gaudreau and Matt Boldy have not done anything to alleviate that load a little bit for him, because for all intents and purposes, Kevin Fiala is not the player that we saw at the end of the regular season right now. We know that. But I also, for lack of a better term, he's been working his nuts off, man. He's definitely put in the effort to try to engage in corner battles. He's driving to the net. He's carrying pucks into the zone on zone entries. He's doing all of these things that you're supposed to do when you're not scoring, which is generate offense and create chances. They haven't been the great A's that we've been accustomed to in Kevin Fiala's tear at the end of the regular season. Does he have to wake up at some point in the series for the Wild to probably advance in this one? Absolutely. I'm still not at that point where I'm terrified yet. Now, if he's cold or if he's garbage in game 5, then definitely I'm jumping in that train. But I still think he hasn't been a liability yet. Do we need him to be more than just not a liability? Absolutely. But I think the effort is there. I think the process is there for Kevin Fiala. And I think he's frustrated. I'd be frustrated too in that situation.
So let's compare this a little bit, because we have a great comparison to last year in Kirill Kaprizov.
Yeah.
Who, as we know, and this goes to Matt Boldy a little bit too, right? The playoffs are a different animal. They just are. And if you're the St. Louis Blues, don't sit there and tell me that in their board meeting and go, this Kevin Fiala guy, don't have to pay too much attention to him. He wasn't like one of the leading scorers in like a stretch in March at all in the National Hockey League. So there's a couple of things at play here, right? There's the playoffs are more intense. The Blues are a physical team. They are usually pretty well structured defensively, even despite the injuries that are on their back end. The forward group, especially with Ron O'Reilly, to name a couple, they're good defensively. They can be. With Fiala, Boldy, Gaudreau, again, and this is the part in hockey that I think a lot of fans disregard sometimes, right? Is we can pick one guy out of a line and we can say that person's not, but it's a domino effect.
Yeah.
If one person isn't doing anything, the whole line's affected. Now, if Matt Boldy, yes, he's a rookie and he's definitely learning right now what Stanley Cup playoff hockey is like. Freddie Gaudreau has been there with Pittsburgh. He knows this. But I think we know who Freddie Gaudreau is. He's not a game breaker. He's a solid center. He's very defensively responsible. He can help drive possession in the offensive zone if he's the second guy in the puck. I don't think he's a great carrier of possession into the zone. But for Kevin Fiala too, part of the risk reward with Fiala is he can be a bit of a guy that wants to put the team on his back, and sometimes he doesn't make those decisions at the right time either. So we talk about turnovers in the offensive zone. I think the point Russo was trying to make, Noah, was if you're not scoring, and yes, maybe the tweet wasn't worded very well, that if you're struggling, you can't be taking penalties. And granted, with the double minors and stuff, there's some luck in that involved too, but you also are putting the team a little bit out of sync. And does this affect the fourth line conversation? Yes, you can't put your fourth line if you're constantly killing penalties. I think the Wild have been a little bit snake bit to being on the PK too much. I thought they've done actually a pretty good job on the PK, but you're playing with fire with St. Louis. So I think there's a bigger picture element to this. I don't put it on one player in particular, but part of the depth conversation, because we haven't heard and talked about it on this show in the last couple of months, is this line with Gaudreau, Fiala, and for Boldy is going to be important for if they can get past St. Louis. It's going to be even more important in future rounds. So you're right; they have to figure it out, or else.
The thing is, though, good players and good lines that have produced like that in the regular season, sometimes, for better or for worse, the team needs to pick them up. They need to get through round one, and then that line is the line that wakes up when other lines go cold. That's the beauty of a deep playoff run, is you have key contributors at different times who kind of find that element. I want to point something out here, too, when I was talking about driving possession. I did forget, by the way, that Kevin Fiala did have a point in the loss in game number 4, so I apologize for that. But for example, Joel Eriksson Ek has an absolute beast for sure. He has 14 shots on net in this series. Kevin Fiala has 11. Okay, so that I point that out because their ice time is very comparable. Their shift numbers are very comparable. They're both good PK guys. Kevin Fiala has really grown defensively in his game this season, by the way. I've been very impressed with his deployment throughout the season. To me, he's doing the right things, and I think he's really trying to, like you mentioned, with Freddie Gaudreau and Matt Boldy being his first playoff action at the NHL level, kind of trying to pull those guys along. And for whatever reason, you're not getting a bounce for Kevin Fiala. You're not getting the Freddie Gaudreau in the slot who somehow slips free and just, gets a greasy one in front of the net. Matt Boldy, of course, scored, the other day, but other than that has kind of been non-existent in this playoffs besides a couple of physical hits when he is engaged. So for me, I think it is kind of going down to a whole unit type thing. Maybe Dean Evison, dare I say it, maybe he feels like he wants to shuffle that unit up a little bit. Maybe Nick Bukestad maybe gets a look with one of those guys, and Matt Boldy drops down to some limited minutes. I'm not saying that that's the answer. I'm not saying I have a crystal ball, but I think maybe there is some sort of offensive infusion that needs to maybe happen to maybe jumpstart one of these guys a little bit. But my main point being, I don't think Kevin Fiala has been this woe is me liability for the Wild yet. He continues to obviously hurt them if he can't find a bounce, if he continues to be snake bitten. Similar to what we saw with
penalties too.
Similar to what we saw with Kirill Kaprizov, who didn't really open up until about game 6 or 7 of last year's series against Vegas, and then it was too little, too late. Couple goals in garbage time at the end of game 7 there. So, am I not thrilled with Kevin Fiala right now? I think that's fair to say, but I'm not concerned. I'm not, oh, this guy's not a playoff performer. Oh, this guy can't show up. Let's not forget, in that play-in series a couple of years ago against the Vancouver Canucks, Kevin Fiala almost single-handedly carried them through that series. Don't say that this guy isn't a playoff performer. Sometimes when you're on a torrid pace, especially at the tail end of the regular season, and everyone and the numbers are looking good, it's easy to compare that to a playoff matchup and say, oh, this guy just doesn't have what it takes. What's going on with Kevin Fiala? Sometimes as a player, like I talked about, you have 11 shots on goal, 4 of them go in and you get the bounces. You have 11 shots on goal, you take whatever it is, 6 or 7 penalties, and you go -2 in game number 1. Sometimes that just happens in hockey, where you can have good stats making up for bad games, and you can have bad stats really bringing down a player that maybe hasn't been totally terrible as of yet. So Kevin Fiala definitely needs to produce a little bit. I'm not concerned yet. Game 5, I think, will be a little bit more tell-all, but definitely if he can wake up for the series, the Minnesota Wild should be in really good shape, I think is fair to say, Nick. Final question here for this kind of an interesting one. Why does the NHL keep pushing the Wild Blues games back to 8:30? Games 1 through 3 were all at 8:30 Central Time.
It's easy. It's called revenue.
Yeah. Are the California ratings really that important? A staggered starts, they understand, but why not move the Leafs Lightning games back to 8:30? Because the Leafs are in the East. Yeah.
If you just read your own question, your answer is already planted, whatever.
That would be 9:30 Eastern time would be the start time for that, which would be very late.
And and whoever wrote this is complaining about California's ratings. How about the own team's hometowns ratings? Come on, people.
Yeah, especially why would you not want Toronto, Tampa Bay prime time and smack dab at 6:30 at night?
Especially with the Toronto market.
Yeah.
Come on.
There's your answer. But yeah, Nick, any parting thoughts before we head on to our extra ice sessions? Is there anything you wanted to add about this series as we head to game 5? The interesting thing is, by the time we have our next show, we're going to have the answer for the outcome of this round 1.
Yeah. I think if you're Minnesota, must win game 5. for sure. Obviously now it's a best of 3. We talked about before the show, Noah, they've been very, very good at home. They can't sleep that as a laurel because that won't carry you through. But you want to be able to have confidence going into St. Louis for game 6, that if all else fails, you at least have a safety net at home for game 7.
Yeah.
That is the home ice advantage. But,
which they've essentially reestablished, because we talked about, or a lot of people talked about when they dropped game 1, they had to find one on the road. They did that. Both teams did their job on the road so far in this series.
Correct. So you have to hold serve at home. I think that, for me, the Minnesota Wild, you got to tighten up a little bit in the neutral zone. I think you got to contest more pucks at the defensive blue line. Just because, again, I thought that they had a little bit too much possession carry-ins last game. I really thought that they went to school a little bit. They're making some pretty good, smart plays with speed and then dropping things off and backing Minnesota's really good speed defensive core back a bit. So, Ford's got to be better about also trying to pressure against the wall there too, really trying to contest those pucks, force them to get it deep, because we've seen with Spurgeon, Brodin, especially Middleton, they've been really good at retrieving pucks behind the net and then making quick transitions forward. And of course, with Marc-Andre Fleury behind, he can also play the puck, although I get really nervous when he does it. He can do it, right? So at the end of it, I think they're going to be okay, as you mentioned. Again, try to stay out of the penalty box. If you can get a power play goal, for God's sakes, that would even be more of a help. So they've had plenty of chances, we'll put you that way. And if they can find a way to get one to click, that confidence can also build for the next couple of games. Hopefully one more game after that. If you can win it in 6, that'd be even better, because I don't see how Nashville can stop. I think they're going to get swept by Colorado. Yeah. I just don't see it. They're just completely outmatched. And so if you can get a little bit of rest before the start of round 2, if you can finish it off, that would be helpful, especially as Dean Evason talked about trying to get fresh legs into it. It's not that they're banged up, but it's a grind. These series are a grind, and anytime you can get fresh legs to get some guys a rest is always helpful.
Key for me is limiting the neutral zone chances so that when the dump-ins are forced in the Minnesota Wild zone, the defensemen have that extra second or 2 for puck pickups. I think when the Wild have been really hampered, it's when their defensemen have been under duress and feel like they don't have an outlet or enough time to make a composed play when the puck is being floated into their corner. Because as a defenseman in the playoffs, you're going to play hard, heavy minutes. You're going to have forecheckers on your ass the entire game. And I think that that's important, to try to make sure that you can buy your defenseman an extra second or 2 by disrupting the dump-ins or disrupting the forecheck coming in, to give those defensemen a chance. Because I think especially that, the third pairings, your Kulikovs, your Merrill, even Alex Goligoski at this point, sometimes are really struggling with those puck pickups, especially maybe playing potentially more limited minutes in certain games, really trying to find that first pass mentality that, unfortunately, the one guy they could use in that situation, in that role, would be a guy like Ryan Suter. So you got to find a guy that can maybe kind of bridge that gap and be that guy that can snap a first pass up with poise and finesse in a playoff game like that, in my personal opinion. So, other than that, what exciting hockey we have. Hopefully the games are a little bit tighter coming through into the last 3 games. I think that if anything, obviously a Wild blowout win would be very nice, but I think if it's not going to be that, exciting games to the finish, they're not great for the heart, but they're great for the soul, looking back on it in a couple months afterwards. So that will do it for the main portion of the show here for episode 110. We will head on to the extra ice session where we talk all things St. Cloud State men's and women's hockey. Extra ice session here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. Nick Maxon joining myself, Noah Grant. Episode 110 here at the Warming House Den. Nick, St. Cloud State hockey time. A little more college hockey infusion here into our episodes after it's been all NHL. Excited to talk about this. What do you want to start with? You want to start with women's hockey? You want to start with men's hockey? Up to you.
Let's go with women's.
All right, let's start with women's hockey. I'm into that. So women's hockey, as we mentioned, our very good friend of the show, wishing him the best of luck, Steve McDonald, unfortunately was not renewed of the head coaching position. And we have our finalists now for this upcoming position for the season. Former Wisconsin Badgers player and, of course, assistant coach Molly Engstrom, for former UW Stevens Point and North Dakota coach Brian Idalski. Did I say? Yep. Idalski, I think. And UW Eau Claire coach Eric Strand are the finalists for the head coach job for the women at St. Cloud State. Nick, this tweet came out about 2 days ago. It's kind of when the news kind of started to break here. Molly, of course, we know very well. The other two, not as well. But you look at these names, you look at the pedigree, are there particular thoughts that you have in terms of this? Do they stay internal, or do they kind of look out to the wings a little bit?
This is always the question for the organization. I think is tough, right? Because both Molly and Janelle Sergey, the assistants, they both have Olympic pedigree. They both, as we've talked to multiple players, both past and present, about how Molly Engstrom coaches and just how much they learn from them, right? So it's a tough call. You kind of wonder at the collegiate level to know how much of an influence does the students have on these decisions, if any at all. I would think that Molly comes with some high praise from the current core, but does a guy like Adelsky, who has but not only Olympic pedigree recently, but also has a lot of success in his coaching career as well, in terms of having sort of that winning attitude, and how much does that weigh in? So I'm not sure if this is a question of internal versus external, but for this squad that we have hyped for the last couple of years, and has, unfortunately, for lack of better terms, maybe underperformed a little bit, and has not taken, I think, the size of steps we would hope that they would. This is a big hire. This is a big transition, because if there's one thing we can say about Steve McDonald's regime, and whether it was him or maybe it was Molly or Janelle, they started to get some pretty good recruits in. The recruiting classes have been better. Just the product on the ice was not quite as where we want it to be, right? The wins and losses weren't there. So to me, I think Adelsky comes in with a pretty good edge here, just because of his head coaching success, also at the Division I level and USA Hockey type tenure. Yeah. I would think Molly's right there with him. Eric Strand, who again, UW Eau Claire, I believe.
Yeah,
Division III.
His pedigree is really good.
Really good as well. So this is tough. All three of these people I could see behind the bench. Question is, what separates them? And obviously we know Molly pretty well. I don't know the other two particularly very well, obviously on a personal level. The question is, what are they going to try to convince, Heather Weems or who else, in terms of why they're the right person for the job, and how they can get this program over the hump, per se, because I think there's a lot of great pieces there. I think they've got, some really solid people and athletes there. And the question is, what sort of changes are needed to make that happen, and what's their game plan? So, again, I think the move that was unfortunately necessary was made. And again, we were never one that celebrates somebody losing their job, that's for sure. Again, Steve McDonald was a good friend of ours here in the podcast, who wish him well. It just unfortunately didn't pan out for him, and unfortunately for St. Cloud, you have to sometimes make tough decisions, move in a new direction, and have to see how this goes. No, I'm curious if there's any one of these candidates that sticks out for you, and I'm more curious not if it's external or internal, but more of this, because we've seen how, with Brett Larson coming in from a winning culture and a winning pedigree with UMD, right, and how he's carried that here to St. Cloud on the men's side. If you're Heather Weems, what are you looking for in a coaching candidate with a program that, as we talked about, has had its struggles? What are you looking for to try to have a coach come in and try to rectify that?
We kind of alluded to a little bit about what Nick Oliver is going to have to do when he heads to the Fargo Force. And I really think that from what we've seen on the women's side, just making sure that you can kind of manage those emotions of the game, that playing field over a 60-minute game, over 2 games every weekend. And the question is, who do you think is going to be a voice in that locker room that all of those players are going to buy into the most? Pedigree is pedigree. Mike Yeo had pedigree. Did players listen to Mike Yeo? No. Ask yourself that question, and that's the thing. So, who do you think has a really good voice in that locker room? So like you mentioned, as we know Molly very well, the thing about Molly, and again, Molly kind of reminds me a little bit of Nick Oliver, and that she's very attentive to detail, but she's kind of a quieter person, and really is really focused on those finer minutia of the game, so to speak. Could she translate that into a head coaching role and be that voice? Like we also talked about, though, we're not around the team day in and day out at every single practice. So maybe she does have more of a voice when it comes to the team and talking on the bench, as opposed to obviously relating to us as media. On the other side, like you mentioned, with Brian, he brings a great pedigree, obviously being at the University of North Dakota, a really good set of successful seasons there, and has been with the Chinese women's national hockey team for the past couple of years too. So there's, in terms of someone who has the best pedigree on paper. Do you think that being, in another country like China and being able to kind of relate to some of those players internationally is going to be a very good bridge and a very good gap as far as trying to be able to relate to the players who are coming in internationally and infusing that with the players who, of course, are coming in from Canada or coming in from the Midwest and coming from the States, and being able to get all those players from different backgrounds to buy in because of the understanding of his diversity in the game of hockey. To me, I think I'm someone who looks at recent success in terms of the level that they're at and does it translate. I really like what Eric Strand brings to the table. I think all three of these candidates are very good. The thing with Eric Strand, a couple of really strong winning seasons for Wisconsin Eau Claire. I mean, you look at the records, obviously a different level for the WIAC, but a 9-3-1 record in one of the seasons. Finishing the season 22-4-2 overall a couple years ago, winning the first O'Brien Cup in program history back in 2018, setting multiple records. I mean, think about this in the NCAA for him. The Blue Golds, which is the name of the team, setting season goalie save records, a .972 save percentage over the course of a season, goals against average of .71, and a goalie winning percentage of a .944. I don't care what level you're at, that's dominance. That's just dominance. And that talks about a program that, one, is very good and has very good buy-in. Of course, a former USHL player in Des Moines. I think he's someone that regionally has the best connection in terms of recent success, granted at a different level, but recent success, and knows the proximity of the Midwest area as well. I really like him as a candidate. Now, what is he like in the locker room? I've got no idea. All three of them would be fantastic picks. And I think St. Cloud is in a very good spot to be able to pick one of these three. But for me, I think the thing that you look at the most is recent experience. You can't argue with those results at that level. I don't know what Brian Idalski's numbers are for the Chinese national team. I don't have those up in front of me. Molly, of course, knows this team the best internally and knows the players that are there internally. But I think the thing is, and this is not to throw Molly under the bus because I think she's fantastic. She'd be great in this role. I think the fact that knowing that you have Molly there anyway, maybe could create a really, maybe 1-2 punch that could be really great with one of these other two additions that would come in and be a really nice asset. But all three of them, very good choices.
Just one small comment to add to this for Idalski too. As we've mentioned this before, Noah, but the Chinese women's national team was, as I mentioned before, 2 summers ago, was actually here basically in the Midwest touring and essentially skating. They skated at the U of M, they skated in St. Cloud, Wisconsin. I think there's something to be said about Idalski. I mean, hockey in China is not a big sport.
He was part of the Olympic team, as you're alluding to, yes.
Yeah, so. But my point is, part of it at the college level is still being able to teach the game and be able to say the whys. And, this is where you have to be in film breakdown of being able to still develop the IQ side of hockey, which I think is so important. We talk about skill players like, say, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and what we oftentimes overlook as casual fans is how fast their brain is going. If you think Connor McDavid is fast on his feet, I would love to see the algorithm calculations his brain is doing as he's going through the ice at 35 miles an hour. It's absolutely insane. So to teach not only a non-traditional market per se, right, of hockey, but have them find success and, again, to be able to get them to buy into, I think there's some pedigree in that too. So, and as you mentioned, all three of these folks, as you mentioned, St. Cloud's lucky to have this treasure trove to pick from, really. Yeah. And for those who want a quick reaction, right, because we're all about that nowadays, give it time. You have to, give it a year or two. Maybe you see some immediate results with maybe just a stylistic change. And again, we won't know until a head coach has been selected, what he or she will want to do as far as, is there going to be any way different way they play the game? Their coaching style, this and that. Obviously, recruiting is also a question mark too, because we've seen on the men's side, when you commit to a program at some point, you're also committing to a coaching staff. So do we see some transitions because of that? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But again, St. Cloud is poised to make hopefully another stride forward with their women's hockey program. And again, 3 great candidates that can help them lead them there. And it's certainly going to be a tough decision for Heather Williams' athletics department. But either way, a good problem to have here for the women's hockey program.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it might feel like we haven't touched on Molly quite a bit. I want to point that out, but I think it's just because we know Molly is a known commodity. We know what she brings to the table. And I think really highlighting the other two candidates here, because I don't think a lot of people do know about that or know a lot about those candidates too. And like you mentioned, all three of them, a very good opportunity for St. Cloud to really try and continue to get better. Who is going to be the voice of St. Cloud State women's hockey? We're hopefully going to have our answer. Well, we know we're going to have our answer in a couple months' time for sure. So definitely stay tuned. We are excited to await the result and see who is going to put that next stamp on this women's program in the WCHA. Men's hockey side, Nick Oliver leaves. Congratulations to Nick. If you missed his story, that's at the beginning of the Sunrise View News and Notes. Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, I should say. But that leaves a vacant assistant coaching position in the men's hockey world. And the question is, who's going to fill that role here, Nick? I know some people have kind of thrown out Mark Parrish, Matt Cullen, guys that, had good NHL careers. I think if you were gonna throw out two of them,
not Mark Parrish, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I think Matt Cullen is probably the guy that maybe fits that mold. Or Mark Parrish just kind of seems he seems kind of destined for media and kind of what he does. I think Matt Cullen is maybe more where he has his kids camps, he has all of these foundational things of the youth game that he's tried to grow. I think he does have more of that coaching mentality within him. The question is,
but does he want to coach?
Yeah, does it make sense for him to go to St. Cloud when he's rooted so well in Moorhead? The sources that I say that know him personally, he actually has a cabin about an hour and a half away from where I live. I think he's pretty comfortable with his life and just kind of comfortable being with his kids. So I think that might be kind of a difficult catch. Nick,
I don't see Matt Cullen either. I don't.
I'm curious to see if you have a name in mind. I've got a weird one. It's the only one I've got. And you're going to look at me and you're probably going to say, what are you talking about? Because usually you don't just randomly get coaching gigs at the Division I level out of nowhere, right?
No, you don't.
The body that I'm going to throw out here, Clark Kuster.
I think it makes sense.
Clark Kuster. And the reason I say that, he hasn't played since not this past season, but the season before with Pensacola in the SPHL. Psychology major, master's in educational administration. Of course, his bio from back in the day says hobbies include golf, which is typical of a hockey player, and backgammon. You got to be smart to play backgammon. I want to throw that out there. He's a guy that I don't know how much of a locker room guy he was, but he's a guy that I think intellectually maybe fills that void a little bit in terms of what he sees, knowing how to bridge that gap between how to relate with the players, and also he knows the game of hockey really well too. I think that psychology and educational background would serve him really well in a potential role like this. Now, I don't know what he's up to. I haven't checked out.
Isn't he assistant coach for someone right now?
Yeah, I can't remember.
Wasn't it with the Norsemen?
So if it would have been the Norsemen, I feel very bad for missing that. Because I feel like I should
check that. I feel like that's where he's been.
Yeah, and that might have been too. I looked him up very quickly, and he was the first kind of name that kind of popped into my head as someone who was recently with the team that would have that that maybe would pursue that sort of thing. Because I think other guys, your Tyler Andersons, your Will Hammers, guys that have come out, they're very smart, but they're off doing their own thing as far as health administration, as far as medicine and that sort of thing. So they're kind of ingrained in that as well. But yeah, Clark Kuster was a name for me that I think really stuck out. That
he's with St. Cloud as assistant coach.
Okay, well there you go. For whatever reason, their form didn't show it when we had it on our sheet, but that's a guy that even better has some coaching experience now under his belt. He's a guy that I would look very close to home that I think would be a really good thought.
And you talk about locker room, he was an assistant captain his senior year as well. Mind you, Kuster was. You talk about locker room guy. How good of a locker room guy was this? He was, he was basically a third pairing defenseman, so he wasn't what we call by maybe hockey standards an impact player in terms of ice time, offense, that kind of thing, right? But if you're in a captaincy role, whether he was an assistant captain, and you're sort of in that sort of tier of player, right? I think that says actually a lot of volume as to what impact you do have in the locker room, because certainly it wasn't like a Sam Henches where he's out there and you're expecting him to score or, make an impact on the game. You certainly are as a defenseman for sure on the other end, but you're not looked at as like a game breaker. Right. And I think with obviously having some assistant coaching under his belt now, again, it's no different than any other person we talk about as far as coaching candidates is, he's got coaching now. Now, is there other ventures in his life that he's pursuing, right? Is this sort of a side gig for him with the Norsemen? Is he looking to stay in hockey full time? I think it does make sense if he wants that. The other part of it is, does St. Cloud, do they promote RJ Ango, who's their current video coach? Does he jump up to the bench for an assistant coach? Or does he stay as the video coach, and then Clark Kuster, if he's interested and gets hired, does he go behind the bench? There's a lot of moving parts to this, right? So I don't know. He's a name. I don't really have another name specifically, Noah, but I did.
You know, it's interesting. How I ended up picking him. First of all, I'm very chapped that I didn't know that he was part of the Norsemen, because I've seen the lineup card. I mean, the Norsemen have played the Taros plenty of times and kicked the absolute crap out of them this year. The Norsemen are a very good hockey team this season. Good. So I'm kind of rattled I didn't know that. So Clark, I am so sorry, man. But I'm not sorry about picking you, even though I didn't know what you were up to, because just with his pedigree intellectually, I think he's someone that, especially on the back end, you talked about him being, you know, that third pairing, maybe seventh defenseman, kind of had a tumultuous ride at the Division I level. That's an important piece for an assistant coach to be able to relate to some players who maybe aren't getting ice time they're looking for, maybe didn't have the development path they thought of. Being able to kind of bridge that gap, especially on you know, the back end or whatever it may be, as an assistant coach, and being that voice, or knowing what you're trying to do as you learn the scouting, now being at the NAHL level, those are all pieces that Clark can really bring to this table. I think he's a name that definitely should be thrown out there, and I'm glad you concur, even before we realize that he is actually coaching and actually doing, you know, hopefully what he loves.
Well, I realized it, you didn't, so
yeah.
don't bring me in that gap. Come on.
I'm here for comedic relief. Have you seen my face? I have a face for radio, so
don't steal my line. Don't do that.
We're like two peas in a pod.
That's trademarked. Yeah, that's fair. So,
but
you know,
the only thing we have that's trademarked,
right? But to that point, too, you know, and Clark Kuster was also part of the national championship team run. So when you talk about conveying to players who he had to work so hard for every opportunity that he earned, right? So, and whether it is, say, a guy like Adam Ingram, where someone's got a high pedigree, right, that comes in, you know, transitioning from juniors to college, it's a big step, right? And sometimes you're not getting the bounds as you're not performing the way maybe you are used to, right, at that level. I mean, look at Jack Peart the first couple of weeks. It was tough. I'm starting to figure out a little bit towards the end. Yeah, the playoffs looked a little bit shaky, but that's, again, playoffs are a different beast, right? He's a true freshman. He's an 18-year-old, right? Going now 19, I believe. So going into an NCAA, AA playoff role, that's some big roles to fill. He's going to be looked on next year to actually play a pretty heavy minutes role. Again, with the emergence of, holy cow, Josh Lidke. I mean, you talk about a story that Clark Kuster could really sort of almost, compare to. I mean, Josh Lidke coming in wasn't really a regular starter beginning of the season. Then Lidke just sort of outworked everybody else. I mean, what was it? Trey Ball, sometimes Bushy, that was sort of rotating in and out. And for Luke Jaycox, who came back as a Coverdeer, he really sort of saw a very diminished role in terms of his on ice participation. And that's just the way that sports works sometimes. So I think he would be a great fit if he ever threw his hat in the ring. That's the question, right? Is he interested? And more so, does St. Cloud have other names that they want or they have conversations with, right? Or the thing is, Clark Kuster knows the NCHC. I know with this conference, a lot of the coaching pedigree, you want to know this conference, at least have been either a part of it as a player or as a coach. I think that's important because this is the best and most competitive conference in all of college hockey, where you have to be at your best night in and night out. So Clark brings that because he was a part of it. So we'll see. Either way, I think it's important to touch on Nick Oliver and what he brought to the team. We talked about a little bit earlier too, Noah, but what they're losing in Nick Oliver is an infectious personality. And again, young guy that's relatable. I think, again, you can kind of see a replacement there with Clark. Again, a high profile player, again, played in some high profile games, again, Frozen Four appearance, back in 2013. So there's some similarities there. Question is, does Brett Larson have now, with a completely renewed staff, essentially now, what is he looking for? Something different? Who knows? We'll just have to wait and see.
The question is, whoever's the new assistant coach, can they rock the earbuds as well as Nick Oliver did on the bench? That's the real question.
Yeah.
And
I don't know.
and not to be that guy, but Nick's a total man rocket. So, I mean, what are you going to do about that? Good luck, whoever tries to fill that void. But if anyone's looking, Brett Larson, Nick and I are available in case you want us to draw some X's and O's on a board.
I've done some video coaching before.
Yeah, I actually got paid for video coaching in the ACHA one. So technically, am I a coach? Do I have pedigree? What does that mean? Speaking of guys that have pedigree that have earned it this season, though, our last bit of topics, St. Cloud State men's hockey, they added another player to their roster. How about this one? Top OJHL goaltender James Gray, who oddly enough has the exact same name as one of the engineers,
the lead radio guy.
Yeah, for KBSC Radio, who is the student-run broadcast for the men's hockey games where I got my start. And now you hear me on the podcast wave. So that's James Gray at KBSC. You can definitely email him and tell him how much of a terrible impact he had on me and your podcasting listening skills. But goaltender James Gray committing to St. Cloud State, 6'2", 187 pounds. The North York Rangers in the OJHL, 38-13-2 record overall for the team this season. Second place in the South Division that they were in, and he himself finishing with a 25-9-2 record, 3 shutouts on the season, a 9.31 save percentage, and a league best 196 goals against average. So did not compete the previous season due to COVID. Was coming off an injury late in the season the year before, and was actually working with Pittsburgh Penguins netminding coach Andy Chiodo.
Ciccone.
Yeah, during that time. So someone tweeted this, and their tweet was, it made me laugh. Their tweet was, LOL OJHL, what's that? Well,
I knew who that was.
Like, come on, dude. How about
because you're a Maverick fan, I don't care.
Yeah, and how about the SJHL? How about the AJ? How about it's called Junior A hockey in Canada, and we've seen a couple players from Huskies hockey that have come and filled that void. Most recent being, I believe, Tyler Anderson is our most recent.
Yes,
and then it's also is Ryan Rosborough not in that same?
He was, yes, from Ontario. He's an Ontario kid too. So how about the bigger question though that we may have just been answered, because now with transfer Dominic Basie, and now with James Gray, I think the question's been answered of what might happen with the other goaltender that was slated to come in. Is he doing another year of juniors?
Yeah, interesting conversation. Of course, like you mentioned, Jackson Castor is the other body that's there for St. Cloud State up at the Division I level. So maybe Sioux Falls is looking to give him another look, and the Huskies want to give him one more year to see what he can do as well. Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, and actually something that I hadn't really thought of a ton. I thought of it a little bit, but
I think so. Honestly, I mean,
but
they're different leagues.
See, the thing is, when you post numbers like that in Junior A hockey, maybe that's exactly the route that St. Cloud is looking. Is they're thinking maybe, and I mean this in a nice way, maybe James needs a little bit more development, so they're going to bring him to the Division I level. And I say that and most fans are going to go, huh? What do you mean by that? Don't tell me that Isaac Posh isn't going to get development at the USHL level. He's surrounded by a lot of good people. The OJHL and Junior A is a little bit more hit or miss. Now, he worked with Pittsburgh Penguins goaltending coaches. Yes, we talked about that. But maybe bringing him up to the Division I level, giving him a look as far as trying to get him bigger, stronger, getting him to develop maybe in that third goaltending role. Then you know that Jackson Castor is kind of hitting the end of his career in terms of that sort of thing. Then maybe Isaac Posh is the next body, and Dominic Basie is the stopgap in between those that maybe takes the place for the Huskies there. So that might be a route that St. Cloud is kind of thinking in terms of development too, because let's be honest, if it's not this year, if it's not next year, for sure the year after is kind of maybe where we're going to start to see the youth goaltending infusion really take shape for this Huskies team. The goaltending position is going to be a lot different than when we had the David Rennick show for the past 4 and a half years out of his 5-year career as a St. Cloud Husky. So it's a very interesting point. I'm curious, since you asked the question, you have to have an answer, right?
I would think Isaac Posh stays in the USHL. I would think so, because otherwise, why make this move?
For fun.
Right. And I think, well, and think of it this way. There's, and I don't know this for sure, but there's been rumors with Dominic Basie's, shall we say, commitment as far as to the game, and whether that's, the physical side, meaning the workouts, or the, commitment to whatever's being coached.
Or the fact that, let's just be honest, he played on a not so great NCHC team.
Right. And does that have a factor? Maybe.
Yeah.
So, and again, with great goaltending trios, as we had all three of their previous goaltenders on, Castor, Lamoureux, and now David Rennick, 2 of the 3 now departed, right? They were all great friends. They were all great teammates. They push each other. So you want that good chemistry, and you want that internal competition.
Yeah.
What it tells me is St. Cloud with Isaac Posh, whether it's individual wise, and I think there's some room for growth there as well. And if you have an extra year of juniors, why not use it? You want some goaltenders at a similar level of development to push each other, right? I don't think Isaac Posh was at their levels between either Kuster or to Dominic Basie. So this gives you 3 solid goaltenders. It gives you a little bit of injury protection, obviously. St. Cloud didn't figure that out at all this last year.
And let's not discount the fact, and I think we keep kind of running around it a little bit. Guys, Jackson Kuster could absolutely turn a corner next year and be the guy. I think we have Dominic Basie kind of penciled into that slot a little bit tentatively, but honestly, Jackson Kuster could have a really good camp coming in. The coaches know him very well, and he could be the guy. He could get the start in the season, and he could absolutely run with it. He's a good goaltender. I don't say what you want about the Quinnipiac game. He's a good goaltender. He is. He
wouldn't be on the roster if he wasn't. And let's take it a step further, Noah. Again, goaltenders are they're creatures of habit. And for him, he wasn't getting consistent minutes. He got it essentially in a need situation. And it was, dare I say, just timing wise. I mean, it's not a great situation for him to be thrusted into a playoff for conferences.
Just ask Louis Domingue.
Right. So, and to that point too, Noah, sometimes people can rise to that opportunity, and like you said, and really take hold of the mantle. Some don't.
Well, the question is, big save Dave Riddick, in his first game with Nashville, had a very poor start. The team didn't start well around him, and it's like, does Connor Ingram get the shot to shine if big save Dave posts 30 of 32 and the Preds win 2-1? Those are things that. That's just goaltending.
Right. So, I mean, obviously training camp, and then obviously the non-conference schedule will be very telling for the Huskies. Do they rotate goaltenders to see? Do they have a better idea maybe at a training camp who's going to be starting? Do they now with not I won't say a true number one because it was David Rennick's net, but maybe because it's more of a question, do they do more of a goaltender rotation now where we have one Friday, maybe one Saturday, until maybe somebody emerges and takes that mantle? I think the one thing's for certain, Noah, that it's very much anybody's net at this point, which is good for all three. And it'll be a nice competition to see who grabs hold of that job and holds it or maybe not.
Yeah, well, as Herb Brooks would say, that's not Jim Craig's net until he wants it. We'll have to find out. Nonetheless,
again.
Yeah. Should I ruin that story for people who have seen the movie Miracle? I will not. But look it up if you want to on your own time. But you mentioned potential minutes and potential scheduling things. We have scheduling things of our own that we want you to know here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. As you know, the college hockey season is over, so we're kind of playing it by ear around the NHL squad and also our own personal schedules. I am actually down in Nick Oliver's neck of the woods, skating with actually some Division I and Division III men and women down in Fargo this weekend. So that's going to change our show and what we're going to be doing. So we're going to probably
bro.
Well, I'm just telling people where I'm going to be. Hopefully Nick Oliver should come out with us. That'd be great. Nonetheless, regardless of what Nick Oliver is doing, what we're doing is I think we're going to do another Monday night recording coming up on next week and a Tuesday morning release for episode 111, episode 111 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. So if that changes, we'll let you know. Someone did ask me on Twitter, which is the place to be for all those announcements that are related to our scheduling changes here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. At Warming House Den on Twitter is usually where you'll see it, and we try to update you as early as we can, but also potentially as close to what the original show time was supposed to be as well too. So we do our best. We try to be flexible. We promise we're not trying to disrupt the schedule of podcasting because we know and value our listeners and know how much you guys like that consistency, and we enjoy having you here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. So obviously find us on Twitter as well as HuskiesWarmingHousePodcast.com. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and episode number 110 is done, and we will see you next week.
And your one-timer come in, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Kaprizov in for a chance to win it. He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real. Welcome to the NHL. A game winner.
seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.